Hi, this is Tony Robbins. What are you doing these days in your life? I don't know what's going on with you because you don't talk to me enough. It seems to be a one-way conversation. When are you guys going to start talking to me? Well, some of you are. I get the chance to read your letters, and I appreciate that very much. But I wanted to take a moment to visit with you today and share with you one simple, single understanding that when you really fully utilize it, can instantly change virtually any area of your life. And what I really like to do in this session with you is just stimulate you to think, sensitize you to this distinction of power that I've made, that once I understood it, it truly has changed my life. You know, most of you who spend any time with me know that I've spent most of my life constantly searching for ways to make changes in human behavior and feelings. I mean, when you think about it, we all want to change one or two things in our lives. We either want to change how we feel, or we want to change what we're doing. And I've constantly searched for those. And so I've mastered a whole series of technologies, you know, from earliest days with positive thinking kind of stuff, to Gestalt therapy, to neurolinguistic programming, Ericksonian hypnosis, and then now the development of some of my own neuroassociative conditioning tools. But as I've been immersed in all those things, the one thing I've always looked for is what could produce results for us at the fastest tempo. How can we create a change in an instant that really could last? And over the years, I've learned a lot of things and I'm real proud of what I've been able to share with people. But in the last 2 years alone, I've begun to focus not only how to produce changes rapidly in people, but how to produce what I call global changes. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in essence, you could come to me and say, gosh, I want to stop biting my fingernails, or I want to be confident when I'm around, authority figures, or I want to stop overeating in this situation. And using a variety of tools, again, my own, or tools like neurolinguistics or Ericksonian hypnosis, I could definitely assist you to do that and show you how to assist yourself. But I began to develop a new goal. And that goal is there an area of the mind that I could penetrate, and I could help other people to penetrate within themselves without a lot of extensive, detailed training, that could help us to make one change that would change all kinds of things in our lives. The domino effect, if you will, a processional effect. If you could just change this one thing, many things would change simultaneously. And over the last 2 years, as I've worked on neuroassociative conditioning and my destiny technologies, I've come up with a lot of incredibly simple tools that really do produce results. Not just results in one area of your life, but often multiple areas simultaneously. So of the many tools that I've developed that I consider to be simple and powerful, things that can create change so easily that almost anyone can use them immediately, the one I want to focus on today I call global metaphors. Now you might say, Tony, already it doesn't sound that simple. What is this metaphor stuff? What is a metaphor? Well, think about it. A metaphor is nothing but a figure of speech that usually implies a comparison between two things that really aren't alike. For example, you might compare the fact that you feel a little hurt inside, you might call it a broken heart. Well, it isn't really a broken heart, but by describing it that way, you certainly have an impact on how you feel. Or if you say, I'm scarred emotionally, that's a metaphor. If we took your heart out right away, we'd see it wasn't broken. And if we looked at your emotions, if there were such a thing as a thing called emotions, we'd find out they really aren't scarred. And you know what? Most of us use metaphors continuously. They're a part of the human language. They're a part of the way that we communicate. But here's the challenge. Most of us rarely notice the impact we have by using these metaphors. Now, there's all kinds of metaphors that don't create negative impact. I don't want to imply that. A lot of them create positive feelings. Sometimes we say things like, well, you're looking at me with puppy dog eyes. Doesn't that make you feel a little different than you go, quit staring at me? So global metaphors are not necessarily bad. Or if you say something like, I'm tickled pink. Listen, you're not being tickled and you're not pink. But it sure feels good to use that metaphor, doesn't it? For some people, life's a bowl full of cherries. For other people, it's a war. Do you think that makes any difference in the way you look at life, the way you feel about life, the way you approach your life? See, we have metaphors for everything. Now, you may not call it metaphors, but think of a metaphor as any time you start to create a comparison, where you use a word to describe something that it really isn't. When you use a metaphor, by the way, you're taking a quantum leap and transforming your experience. Global metaphors change the way we perceive, the way that we think, the way we feel, what we experience of our lives. See, you need to remember something, an organizing principle of everything I've taught you. It's simply this. We don't experience reality. We experience our representation of reality. Again, what does that mean? Well, I've given you many metaphors to describe this. Metaphors are an easy way to teach. One I think I taught you maybe in Personal Powers, I give the example of how we feel is not based on reality, but what we focus on, what we represent inside our heads, how we picture things, what we say to ourselves. For instance, I think I've given you the example in the past of maybe going to meet your husband or wife for dinner one night, and you're supposed to be there at 6:30, and you get there at 6:30 and they're not there. How do you feel? Well, no problem for most people. 6:45, Well, some people start to have a little change of state. 7 o'clock, some have a bigger change of state. And some people, by the way, get worried. Some people get upset. Some get angry. What's the difference? The difference is not based on reality. It's based on the way we represent reality. And in this case, it's not being done metaphorically. The person who's worried is thinking things like, oh my gosh, what if this person was hit by a car? And they may be making pictures in their mind and representing to themselves a scenario that makes them feel fearful or concerned. Whereas the person who's upset is assuming a bunch of other things. They may be upset because they're representing inside their head that, gosh, this person really doesn't care, or they're not committed, or they're off with somebody else. And we have emotional reactions to however we represent our world. Now, the person may come through the door, and it was neither of those things. It wasn't that they didn't care, and it wasn't that they were in an accident. But during that time, during the time we were focusing in that way, representing things in that way, we felt those emotions. How does this relate to metaphors? Well, realize it's not life, but the way you represent life that determines the way you feel. So when you turn around and you say, gosh, I'm scarred emotionally, that is exactly how it feels. It does not feel just hurt a little bit. It feels scarred. And that metaphor will come up to make you feel the same way again and again and again. See, oftentimes we use metaphors out of convenience without looking at their impact. Again, both positive and negative. How do we normally use metaphors? Well, we use them, number one, to learn or to teach. See, oftentimes we can't understand something because we don't have the experience of it. A metaphor is a way of transferring understanding by taking something you already understand and attaching it to a new idea. For example, many people believe, even those of different faiths, that a man named Jesus Christ was one incredible teacher. His works have survived thousands of years. And the way he taught, the way he shared ideas and understandings often was through metaphor. He adapted his style of communication so that it met the understandings of the people he was speaking with. For example, when he went to fishermen, again, he didn't say, let's go recruit Christians. He said, I want to teach you to become fishers of men. Immediately, there was a whole set of understandings about how to get the job done then, because they knew how to fish. They knew what was involved, and they could apply those understandings to impacting people. While metaphors can certainly help us to understand things much more quickly, that's one of their powers, they can also sometimes, while they're empowering us, limit us just a slight bit. Because we've got to realize our metaphor is not the same as reality, but we start responding like it's identical. And a modern example of this would be studying physics. For years, people who were studying atoms were taught that an atom is like a solar system, in that in the middle is this nucleus, which is like the sun. And then revolving around it on the outside are protons and electrons. Well, with that understanding and using that metaphor, what rules come with that metaphor? What preconceived notions? Well, one would be that these electrons and protons stayed equidistant or a certain exact distance away from the nucleus as they revolved around it. But this isn't true. They vary in distance constantly. And as a result of this, a lot of people are locked into a mindset that kept them from being able to solve certain problems in physics. So we have to be selective in the metaphors that we utilize, because metaphors have tremendous power. They can help us share ideas. They can help us to share our emotion. They can intensify our emotion or lessen it depending upon which metaphor we select. I mean, think about it. All of poetry is really based on metaphor, isn't it? But we must know the impact of the metaphors we utilize, and we need to be conscious in our selection. Let's take a look at some of the impact of metaphors you may have that you're not even aware of, because you may be sitting there saying, metaphors, I don't use this word, I don't use metaphors. Oh, yes, you do. They're a living part of your language. Let's say, for example, what is life? And here's a nice way of thinking about metaphors, by the way. If you use the word is or like, those are good ways. Or as, like, is, or as are usually when you're starting to link things. You're taking something that isn't the same as what you're talking about and making it the same. So, for example, what is life like? Now, for some people, they say, well, life is like a war. Now, I want you to think about that one metaphor. If you adopt that metaphor with it, you begin to adopt a series of beliefs that affect the way you think and the way you feel about life itself, what you'd be willing to do and not do. A whole set of rules and ideas and preconceived notions come with any metaphor you adopt. So if life's a war, what's life like? Tell me. You might say, well, it's tough. Well, it means it's about death as well. You might say, well, it's going to be me against somebody else. You might say there are going to be battles. You might say, well, if life is really a battle itself, then maybe, I'm going to get hurt. All of those filters will affect your decisions and your feelings. Now, some people say, no, life's not a war. It's not a battle. Life's a test, though. Well, great. What comes with the belief that life is a test? What comes with that global belief? Well, if it's a test, again, maybe it's going to be tough. Maybe you better study. Maybe you better be prepared. You could fail. And some people look at life as a test. For example, I was reading an article not long ago where they interviewed Donald Trump, and he was saying, well, life's a test. You either pass or you fail. If you're not in first, then you failed. Can you imagine how that metaphor has affected his decisions in his life and how he feels emotionally? For some people, life's a game. Now, if life's a game, what would you believe about life? How would that affect you as an ultimate filter to all your thinking and all your beliefs? Well, it might be fun. What a concept. It might be somewhat competitive. It might be a chance for you to really play a lot and enjoy a lot more. Some people say, well, if it's a game, then there's going to be losers. Other people say, well, it'll take a lot of skill. It all depends on what beliefs you attach to the word game. But with that one metaphor, again, you have a set of filters that are going to affect the way you think and the way you feel. What if we thought life was sacred? I hope you do think that. But if that was your primary metaphor for life, some people say, well, then it would be something that you would cherish. Other people say, well, then I'd be really careful with it. What if you thought life was a dance? Wouldn't that be a little different? What comes with life being a dance? Well, it's something beautiful. It's something you do with other people. It has grace. It has rhythm. It has joy. Maybe it has sexuality tied into it. Who knows? Maybe it's a lot of fun. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong way of looking at life. Maybe life's a gift, right? Think about how your life changes and how you look at your entire life differently just by changing the global metaphor you adopt inside your head. Are we limited to metaphors about life? Oh, no. We got metaphors about our work, for example. Some people call it, yeah, I got to go to the prison today. You think that might affect the way you feel about what you do? Other people see it as, oh my gosh, I'm going to go be with my friends. I'm going to go join that team. I know a lot of business people who use global metaphors for their businesses, the businesses they own, and it's things like, well, it's my asset. And they look at people as either assets or liabilities. And do you think that affects the way they treat people, the way they think about people, the way they connect with people? That one belief changes it all. In my business, I think of it as a family. And you know what? That totally changes the connection I have with the people that I work with every single day because we're all one. We're all together. Some people look at it as a unified team, a team that's going to go out and win. Other people look at a business as being like a garden, where every day you've got to do things to maintain it and somehow improve it so that someday you can reap a reward. See, again, the metaphors you select will affect you tremendously. And I'm here to tell you that these metaphors are going on, whether you're aware of it consciously or not. That's the scary part, because you may have never consciously decided what metaphors you wanted to use to describe life. Where did you get your metaphors? Well, probably you picked them up from people around you. You may have picked them up from your parents or from your friends. And again, you didn't think about their impact. It just seemed convenient or fun to say, or maybe you didn't even think about it at all. It just became a habit. I'll give you an example of how I really learned all this, the power of metaphors, because certainly I heard the word metaphors before, but I thought of metaphors as only being stories, or maybe a quote would be a metaphor, like one that guided my life during tough times when I felt a little fearful was, a ship in a harbor is safe, but that's not what ships were built for. So that's a great metaphor. It instills a belief. It makes you think of yourself like a ship, and, you got to make it through the storms and everything else, but that's what life is for. That's what life is about. But what I began to realize is that our metaphors can also be destructive. And how I came across this understanding happened in a meeting that I talked to you about with two of my friends. One was the CEO of one of my companies, and the other one was a good friend of both of ours. And a person came in the room and shared some information with all three of us. And that information was, somewhat negative. In fact, it was quite negative in terms of its impact upon all three of us. But we all had a totally different response to it. The CEO of one of my companies at that time absolutely lost it. He went crazy. He went into absolute rage. I mean, so intense he actually concerned me. I got rather angry. And my friend, he got mildly upset. What happened that day is I looked around and I thought to myself, what is going on here? Why is this guy so out of control? And I said to him, what is it that's driving you so crazy about this? What's going on? He said, well, it's like, and by the way, I'll stop right there for a second. Think. He said the word what? Like. That should become a cue for you that you listen to. When people say it's like, or it's just as if, that should be a clue that they're about to give you a metaphor very often. He said, well, it's kind of like, they got us in a box and they got a gun to our head. He was talking about somebody who was negotiating in a rather interesting way. Now, I got a question for you. Do you think your emotion would be somewhat intense if you thought somebody had you in a box with a gun to your head? It's not hard to figure out why he was in rage. And so for years, I've had people do things like that, and without realizing it, I've helped people to change how they were feeling by breaking up what I now call their global metaphor. So I turned to him and I said, well, what color is the squirt gun? And he looked at me and said, what? Which, as you can imagine, broke his pattern. I said, well, what color is the squirt gun? Now you might say, well, what does that do, Tony? Well, what does it do if I say to you, don't think of the color blue, don't think of the color blue, don't think of the color blue, don't you dare think of the color blue? What are you going to think of? Color blue. Now remember, whatever we focus on, Whatever we represent in our heads, whatever is said to us, when we focus on it, it changes the way we feel. So when I say, what color is a squirt gun? I say it 2 or 3 times. He eventually has to picture this gun being a squirt gun, the one that was imaginary in the first place. And when it's a squirt gun, all of a sudden, do you think his emotion changes? Then when he thinks there's a gun there? Sure enough. He starts to laugh a little bit and says, well, you know what I mean. I said, well, I only know one thing, because I knew he was competitive. I said, I know no one could ever build a box big enough to hold me. He looked at me and he grinned, a little sheepish grin, and he said, all right, I got it. I said, really what you're saying is that they did something here that wasn't really very fair. That's different than putting somebody in a box and putting a gun to their head. The way you're representing this experience metaphorically is making you upset. If you want to use a metaphor, use a more empowering one. Like, these guys are like, we're playing a tug-of-war with them, and they got more guys on their side right now. So that would be more empowering, because it means we need to get some leverage on our side. That would be more intelligent, wouldn't you say? He started laughing and said, yeah, but he normally uses metaphors like that. That's why he feels so darn intense all the time. He selects aggressive metaphors. I'll never forget in A Date with Destiny where I had this man who was describing things, and he kept talking about how he was in so much pain in his life because everybody was always stabbing him in the back. He described a relationship with a woman in which he felt like what she did was, when she rejected him, he felt like she took a particular appendage of his body and slammed it into a door. And you can imagine which appendage he was talking about. I mean, it was rather intense, as you can imagine. I mean, the bottom line is, if you're feeling really bad about something, I'd take a quick look at what metaphors are you using to describe how you're feeling, or why you're not progressing, or what's getting in the way. Because oftentimes you're taking a feeling and you're making it into more than what it really is. I mean, what's the standard metaphor? Making a mountain out of a molehill. See, you don't want to get caught doing that to yourself. And again, you know what's neat, though? This is so simple. Again, on this tape, all I want to do is expose you to a bunch of examples so you become sensitized to them. If you hear enough of these, you're going to start catching yourself and other people. And when you catch yourself, making a change is very easy. All it takes is a choice to change it, or to ask somebody, is that really what you mean? Is that really what it is? Or is it more like this? And offer them an alternative metaphor. And oftentimes they'll grab it. Just like when I said to my friend, hey, is it really they got a gun to our head? Or is it more like this tug-of-war? Or you sometimes feel like in this negotiation it's a seesaw. Sometimes we seem to be up, sometimes they seem to be up. And as you give people other metaphors, if they adopt them, it will change the way they think, the way they feel, and what they do. I'll never forget, years ago, I was doing a seminar, a certification program, and I was doing it back in Scottsdale, Arizona. And in the middle of the seminar, about a week into it, this one gentleman jumped up and started screaming at the top of his lungs and like stabbing out at people with his bare hands like he was holding a knife. And he started saying, I'm blacking out, I'm blacking out, I'm blacking out. Well, the psychiatrist in the front row said, he's having a psychotic episode. Fortunately, I didn't take his view of things, or I would have been in deep trouble, because maybe I don't know how to deal with psychotic episodes, but I sure know how to change people's states. And I didn't know it at the time, but I know how to change people's metaphors. So I came up to this guy and I yelled, okay, then just white it out. White it out. You know how to do it. Use that stuff when you were typing. White it out. And the guy went, huh? It just totally broke his state. And all these people that were running for him paused to see what was going to happen. I said, come on, do it. You know how to use it. Just white it all out. And all of a sudden his face changed and his body changed. He started to breathe differently. And he looked at me and I said, so how's that? He said, that feels a lot better. I said, well, sit down. And I went right on to speak. And everybody looked dumbfounded, and the psychiatrist was dumbfounded. I was kind of dumbfounded, except I had to look cool, like I knew what I was doing. So I just went on and continued, right? But what I'd done, I wasn't aware of it, is I had changed his metaphor. And by the way, I didn't have another challenge with that guy, and he came up to me 2 days later, and he said, I don't know what it was the other day. He said, but I turned 40 that day, and he said, I just lost it. By the way, is that a metaphor? Losing it? How do you lose yourself? You're here. Hello? Guys, are you here? I'm noticing. I'm talking. Let me see your hands. We got to realize we oftentimes make these metaphors as if they're real. They're not real. They're just figures of speech. But we start responding to them like they're real. And he said, I just lost it. And he said, I was experiencing this unbelievable thing. Like I felt like stabbing out and jamming out because I was in this blackness, and I felt like it was swallowing me up. He said, but boy, when I put that white out on there, he said, everything just brightened right up and I felt totally different. And he said, I haven't had a challenge with it since. He said, I went and read the paper that day, and I started thinking of new thoughts. And he said, you know what? He said, I feel fine today. And he was fine the rest of the time, just by changing one little metaphor. And I didn't even know what I was doing then. Realize how easy it is to create a change. A woman came to me in a therapeutic context a few years ago, and she was a former Miss America. Very, very incredible lady, powerful woman who really cares about people. But she hadn't been able to sleep for years. Why? Well, simply because as a young girl, she was molested by her father year after year after year. I think it was from the time that she was approximately 6 or 7 years old up until the time she was about 14. And she tried to tell people, and she tried to communicate it, and When she tried to bring it to the family, they all tried to deny it had happened because it was so shameful for them all. And as a result, she really beat herself up. And she'd been through every kind of therapy you can imagine. She was taking drugs to go to sleep. And so I sat down with her and I started working with her. And I said, well, tell me, what's going on? Why is this happening? Why can't you sleep? What's going on? And she didn't tell me at first what was going on. She first told me through metaphor. She said, I don't know. I just feel like I'm marble, like I'm stone. I'm shiny and bright on the outside. And everybody thinks I'm so wonderful. But on the inside, she said, I'm hard and I'm cold and I can't feel anything. And I said, well, you're marble, huh? And I said, zzz, zzz, zzz. And she said, what are you doing? I said, I'm drilling holes in the marble. And she looked at me like I was crazy, which immediately interrupted her pattern. I said, let's take a look in here. What do you see? Help me out. What do you see there behind that marble? And we looked at little cracks in the marble. What happened there? She goes, well, it's really loving and warm in there. And that little thing that seems like nothing, see, when we use a metaphor, we kind of trance ourselves out. We start distorting reality. So why not distort it in a way that serves you? And as I got inside there, I started following everything she said with metaphors. And we entered in behind the marble. We jackhammered out the rest of it and got inside there and started flowing on this river of love. But it was stopped up at places. So what do you think we did? We brought out the liquid plumber and, plumbed it all out and started flowing some more. And eventually we got to this room. And this is the room that kept her up at night. There was all these sounds coming out of it. And as we got closer and closer, and by my asking her questions and keeping her talking about metaphors, she told me that there was this man in the room and he was playing the piano. And I said, what's he playing the piano for? And she said, I don't know. I said, well, ask him. And she said, well, it's because he's trying to keep me awake, so I'll be protected in case my dad comes. I said, well, your dad's no longer here, is he? She said, no. I said, well, look how old that guy is. Now, by the way, when people use metaphors, they're highly suggestible because their metaphors are made up anyway. She goes, yeah, he is old. I said, isn't it time for him to retire? And she looked at me and smiled, and she said, yeah. I said, well, go give him a big hug and thank him for taking such good care of you. And tell him it's time for him to retire. Tell him he can come back and play, though, but during the daytime, And she did. And what was amazing? I'm cutting the story short for obvious reasons, but for 2.5 hours we did this, one metaphor after another, changing them and changing them and changing them. And the next day she was able to sleep without drugs for the first time. See, metaphors have more of an impact than we realize. And changing a metaphor can change your whole life. You got to discover what the metaphors are you're using so that you can change them consciously in a way that really enriches your experience of life. So what can you do if you find yourself saying things like, well, I'm at the end of my rope? Put the rope down. That's what you can do and walk away. When people start doing that stuff, that's what I tell them. I go, I'm at the end of my rope. I said, well, I don't say tie an eye and hang on for dear life, baby. I said, well, set the thing aside and walk over here. And they get this dumbfounded look on their face, and then all of a sudden they start to grin, and it instantly breaks their pattern. Remember, whenever we have a pattern of looking at the world or making things up in our head, if we do something radical to interrupt that pattern, and we keep interrupting it, pretty soon we can't get back to it. Remember the metaphor I used to teach you this, which was scratching a record. The only way you can feel a certain way is the same way you hear the same music over and over again. You got this record with a groove in it, but if I come along one day and I take a needle and I go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth across your record, pretty soon that record will never play the same way again. Do this to yourself. Anytime you find you've constructed your world in a way that creates limitations, interrupt it and replace it with power. Replace it with something that's more loving. Replace it with something that's more fun. See, if you find yourself saying things like, oh, I'm over the edge, maybe an alternative might be enjoy the slide. There's all kinds of possibilities. Be creative. Be playful. Now, here's the challenge. A lot of people get like one metaphor, and they filter everything through that one metaphor. Like everything in life is a war. Everything is a battle. It doesn't matter whether it be a relationship or whether it be their business or anything else. See, no one metaphor is the right metaphor. In fact, our real goal is to be flexible in using our metaphors. Even in my own business, where I saw my businesses as being my extended family, and I didn't even call it extended, it was my family. Because of that, I do almost anything for the people in my business. I care about them tremendously. And because of that, I could never fire anybody. How do you fire a family member? And sometimes I needed to. So once in a while I had to change it and say, okay, it's not my family. What this is this is a vehicle to reaching and impacting people. And there are parts of this vehicle that need to be updated or maintained. Or there's parts of this vehicle that have to be taken out and reinstalled with an updated version. The bottom line is if what you're doing isn't working, change your metaphors. As I began to immerse myself in this idea that I now call global metaphors that have a global impact in the way we think and the way we feel, I started seeing them everywhere. So like, haven't you had that experience? I think we've talked about it before where, you buy a certain outfit or a car and then you see it everywhere. Well, I started noticing everything I could about metaphors. And of course, that led me into myths and stories, because the stories that have guided your beliefs in your life, the stories that have been told to you growing up, definitely are a filter as well. But sticking with metaphors, I came across a great quote from Gregory Bateson's daughter, who now is an anthropologist herself. She said, "Few things in life are more debilitating than a toxic metaphor." What a nice metaphor, a toxic metaphor. Now, I'll give you an example of that, by the way. Recently, I was doing a date with Destiny, and there was a woman that everybody was complaining about. And they were complaining about it before the seminar had even begun. She created all kinds of problems out at the registration area. And when she got into the room, she was complaining about how hot and how cold it was simultaneously. First, she complained it was too hot, then too cold, in a space of 5 minutes. She was upset with the person in front of her because that person was too tall. By the time I got up to speak, I couldn't go for more than about 5 minutes without her interrupting and trying to find how what I said really didn't work or wasn't really true or there was some kind of exception. Now, knowing a little bit about something called meta-programs, I pictured her as a mismatcher, but that really wasn't what she was. And I kept trying to do all the things I knew on how to change people, and they only worked temporarily because I was trying to make a change at an effect instead of the cause. I was dealing with one little challenge in one little area instead of looking at her as a global being. And what I began to do is realize she must have some metaphor about life that's making her such a fanatic for all these details and being almost mean-streaked in her approach. And finally, I asked her, I said, "What are you trying to gain by doing this?" I said, "What do you believe that makes you run around and do this all the time?" I said, "I know you must have a positive intent." I said, "What's your belief about life or about details or about, whether things are right or wrong?" She said, "Well, I guess I just believe that small leaks sink the ship." And I thought, wow, there it is in one simple metaphor. Think about it. If you thought small leaks sank the ship, do you think you might be a little fanatical about finding any possibility of a tiny leak since you're going to die? You're going to drown if you don't find it? That's how this woman was. I mean, going to a seminar, I was like, boy, I better find the leaks before they find me, before I drown. And so we made a change in her metaphor. And what we began to do is teach her a new way of looking at herself, a new way of looking at life. That maybe it was a game, maybe it was a dance. We got her to combine a whole variety of these metaphors. And you should have seen this woman change. Not just in the way she treated other people, the way she treated herself. Because she was always finding the small leaks in herself, by the way. She was always noticing what wasn't perfect in herself and driving herself crazy. Not to mention did she destroy her relationships. So we've got to notice what the metaphors are. Now, what are some examples of empowering metaphors? Well, one of the most empowering ones that has guided my life through tough times is the metaphor of seasons. Now, I've used it many times on tapes and in my books. Because when times are the toughest, you need to be able to make some kind of meaning out of that. And it's tough when you're in the midst of it. Your brain just goes, oh my gosh, this is going to go on forever. But what I began to do is, hey, life is like the seasons. And I'm in winter right now. But the great thing is if you adopt this metaphor, what always follows winter? Spring, sun comes out. You're no longer freezing to death, right? Where all of a sudden you're able to plant new seeds. You get to notice all of nature and the beauty and the life and growth and all those wonderful things. And then there's summer. You're doing everything right. You planted your seeds and it's hot and it's warm and you either burn out your seed during that time if you're not careful, if you don't nurture it, or maybe you get tan. All depends on how you look at things. Once you got a metaphor, you can lay metaphors on top of metaphors. It's kind of fun. And then there's fall where you get to reap your rewards. And sometimes you planted the seed and you made it through the hot summer and you get to fall and it doesn't work out well. Well, that's true. Sometimes that happens in life too. Sometimes before you reap, a hailstorm comes in and destroys your crop. But see, if you believe in seasons, you know that you're going to get another chance. Also, as I began to look at that metaphor, I started coming up with the idea that, hey, in winter, you don't have to freeze to death. You can ski. Again, laying another metaphor on top of a metaphor. We need to find things that empower us. And during my darkest time, that metaphor almost always pulled me out. Or another one a friend of mine shared with me, who, by the way, wrote a book with a metaphor as a title. His name was Harvey McKay. It's called How to Swim with the Sharks and Not Get Eaten Alive. It's kind of a metaphor for how he felt about certain people he was doing business with and that you may be doing business with. By the way, one challenge with adopting a metaphor, you don't want to start seeing everyone as a shark. Seeing everybody as your friend, seeing everybody as like your puppy dog, or seeing everybody as your associate or partner in life is a great idea, except when that person is a shark, in which case they're operating from a different set of frames. They have a different set of rules. So you don't want to see everybody as a shark, everybody's your partner. You want to see the best in people and be able to change metaphors where it's useful. But the story he shared with me is one that shaped his life. And it was about persistence, because Harvey's one of the most persistent people I know. I have tremendous respect for him. And that story is the story of the stonecutter. His father told him that the reason he would never give up, and the reason his father became so successful, was because he believed in stone cutting. He said, I want you, son, to become a stonecutter as well. He said what a stonecutter does, he takes his big hammer and he smacks this giant boulder as hard as he can. And he hits it again and again and again and again. And you know what happens? He could hit it 100 times, 200, 300, and not even have a scratch. But he'd keep on doing it. Now, most people say, what are you, an idiot? Can't you see it's not working? But a stonecutter's smart. A stonecutter knows just because you're not getting the feedback you want initially doesn't mean you're not making progress. Pretty good belief to have. He said you keep hitting and hitting, and at some point, maybe on the second 100, third 100th, maybe on the 1,004th hit, the stone splits open right there. It doesn't just crack. In one hit, it breaks open. And again, it wasn't that hit that did it. It was the constant pressure being applied to the challenge at hand. So Harvey's metaphor for himself is, I'm a stonecutter. That's what makes me successful. That metaphor works for me as well, maybe for you. I know years ago I began to have this belief, and I was explaining to people that it didn't look like I was making progress, but I had my wrench on a fire hydrant, and I was pushing on that thing as hard as I could. And once it opened, it was just going to keep pouring forever with just tremendous force. And they all looked at me like I was crazy. But that metaphor kept me persisting, kept me going. Your metaphors don't have to be elegant. They just need to be effective in getting you to take action. By the way, whole cultures are shaped by metaphors. A great example is if you decide to go trekking in Nepal, and you meet people along the side of the road, strangers, people you've never met before. The one thing you notice most about these people, very much like Fijians, they're incredibly loving people. These huge smiles and this warm welcome you get as if they've known you forever. And you know why? As they call to you, they call out a phrase, which in Nepalese means little brother or big brother. They just decide which one you are. I tend to get to be big brother because of my size most of the time. But whatever it is, little sister or big sister, everyone is addressed as their brother or sister. Would that change the way you approach people if that was the filter you had on every human being you met? See, as a society, we've adopted this idea about 10, 15 years ago of planet Earth or spaceship Earth. That sounded like a great metaphor, but it didn't work. You know why? You can't get emotional about a spaceship. We don't notice, we don't treat the Earth when we think of it as a spaceship the way we do when we look at it as, let's say, Mother Earth. What if you thought that everything that you received in your life, you were receiving from the breast of your Mother Earth? And that's what was nourishing your family. Some of you are like raising an eyebrow right now, but it's a different metaphor, isn't it? You'd probably be a little more sensitive. You probably wouldn't put some toxic waste right on your mother's breast, would you? You'd probably think a little different first. We've got to be really careful. We've got to think long term in the development of our metaphors, not short term. In fact, most boats or ships, as well as aircraft, we usually relate to them or describe them as a she, not a he. We have female names for them, or we say, take good care of her. Why do we say her? Why don't we say, take care of him? Or, take care of Joe here, my boat. We might treat it a little different, right? I slap the thing around a little bit, but no, not a she. We're delicate. We caress her. We take care of her. We nurture her. The metaphor works. It enhances that area of life. And there are many cultures, not just the country you live in, but what you do for a living provides another culture with different metaphors. For example, oftentimes lawyers have some challenges in their personal lives and can't imagine why when they come home and try and apply the same metaphors that they use at work at home. They start to have a conversation with their wife or their husband, and next thing you know, they're trying to find out what's wrong with their argument and what their evidence is for backing up what they've said, and they try to have a debate. And that doesn't work too well in a personal relationship. I'll never forget working one time with a couple, one of whom was a quarterback, a star quarterback in the NFL. And he was dating and considering marrying, and she him, a woman who was a pretty powerful movie star. And they had all these problems in their relationship, and most of them seemed to be coming from his upsets. He was upset with her all the time because she was breaking his rules. And almost all of them, though, came into focus as soon as I realized, wait a second, this guy is a quarterback. What are the rules for someone, metaphorically, who's playing a game constantly where they're a quarterback? Well, number one is you got to run the show. You call the plays. People respond to you. You're the director. You're making things happen. And as you're moving up to become the best, you have to be the star. Even though everyone else needs to be a star too, they need to be a star with you. And so the bottom line is this person going off on her own, deciding what she wanted for her life and how she was going to be, and her being a star without having to catch a pass from him. That didn't go over too big with him. It created a lot of challenges. Or an example would be a jet pilot I did some work with. This guy is always finding something wrong with people. He's always seemed to get himself into fights. And the reason was he thrived on having an enemy. Without an enemy, there was no way he could really be the best he could be. Or maybe one of my favorites, because it was so simple to make a change in, was this man who was so disassociated. His family members and his kids just couldn't get through to him, didn't feel connected to him, and they really resented him because he didn't give any feelings and he was always directing them. And you know what he was? An air traffic controller. As an air traffic controller, he had to make himself not be stressed. He had to stay disassociated. The guy on the radio heard his voice going, okay, well, just keep circling around for another couple hours. It'll be okay. That wouldn't have gone over too big, right? So you learn to, when there's a trouble, say, yes, just make a circle and I'll get back to you. That certain disassociated fashion works wonderful there. It doesn't work at home. So we got to be careful that we don't carry the metaphors that work in one context, like the environment we work in, into another context, like our relationships or our businesses or our families or our friends. So what are some of the metaphors that you use daily in your day-to-day life without thinking about it? Do any of them come from your work, for example? Or do you describe yourself in ways like I'm burnt out versus maybe you could have something like I'm recharging? Or do you get upset and say it's an eye for an eye? Maybe you need to come up with a different metaphor, one that's less intense. Or instead of feeling like you've got a mountain full of work to do or millions of things to do, maybe you've got a few things to do and you start taking that mountain and representing it as a stack. Maybe that'd feel a little different. You want to make sure you set yourself up to win the game, and the way to win the game is pick the right metaphor. Let's take a second look at relationships. What are the metaphors you have for relationships? Is the person you're in a relationship with your partner in life? Are they your team member? Are they your lover? Are they your better half? Or do you talk about them as your dictator, the old ball and chain, the old lady, the old man, that jerk and idiot I live with? Do you think those metaphors might make a difference in how they feel? I'll never forget, I had this one lady in a Date with Destiny seminar. Every time she talked about her husband, she'd talk about this jerk I'm with, this idiot. And so I turned to her and I said, ma'am, I'm sure you have a lot of challenges, and I'm sure this man has made a lot of mistakes. And I know you haven't made any. But I'm just curious. Do you think your relationship's going to get any better as long as you hold that he's a jerk and an idiot? I said, also, notice what's happening here. You call him a jerk and idiot, and the times he's talked about you, I hear him say things like, you're the love of his life, or you're his better half, or you're his gift from God. Maybe you ought to re-examine the metaphor you're using to describe him to yourself and to other people and pick something that's more appropriate. Because sometimes we use a metaphor so often it becomes habitual, and we start thinking the metaphor is real, and it's just not. How about kids? What are your metaphors for your kids? Are they the Rugrats? One of my friends who obviously doesn't have kids used to have a metaphor. He called them barfers. Because all kids do. Whenever you're around, they barf all over you. So as long as you hold that metaphor, can you imagine how he responded? He just recently, by the way, got to fill in for Santa Claus at a department store, and he didn't want to do it. A bunch of us put him up to it and set him up so he had to do it. He got to have hundreds of these barfers come and sit on his lap. And you know what? Most of them, with one exception, didn't barf. And the bottom line is he got a whole nother view of what children are about. And he got to change his metaphor. And now he calls them cuddlies. And even get might change the way you feel? You better believe it. Brats doesn't usually make you want to have more of them, nor does it make you want to take good care of them or nourish them. So you got to really make sure you got the appropriate metaphor in each area. Now, how about the metaphors for your body? What is your body? Is it a machine? Is it a disaster? Is it an opportunity for growth? Is it a vehicle? Is it the temple? See, most people don't treat it like it's a temple. And I can tell you, in Date with Destiny recently, last November, about 90 days ago, this is January when I'm chatting with you here, there was a gentleman who we learned to call Maestro, because in Date with Destiny we have people adopt a metaphor for how they want people to respond to them and treat them during the weekend. And Maestro was just this wonderful guy who was extremely overweight. They'd been trying to lose weight through every diet you can imagine. But when I got him up on stage and we did one of these things I call the rules realignments, a special technique we have for changing the rules that your brain uses to make decisions, as we got through it, it became clear that he associated being fat to being spiritual. Because he had all these metaphors of that in order to be spiritual, what you had to do is be like the giant guru, in India. And so sure enough, he actually linked that to me more. And he thought, if you're this big, then the only people that are going to get through to you are spiritual people, because other people are going to be turned off by your fat. He said, I really think that, he said, I know it doesn't make any sense, but he says, it just feels real to me that fat equals spiritual. And so I gave him a metaphor. I said, well, I don't think that. He said, I think God loves fat people. I said, well, I think God loves everybody, but I think what he does with fat people is he sticks them on a skewer and roasts them above hell. You should have seen his face. Now, obviously, I don't believe this, but it was a major pattern for him. And he got the picture in his head. It was pretty intense. And we began to work on a better metaphor for his body, because he said his body was nothing. So, well, what is your body? What's it like? He said, it's like nothing. It's like just there. It's just a vehicle. I said, is it a quality vehicle? He said, well, it doesn't matter if you have quality vehicles as long as it gets you there. So we got him to adopt the idea of a temple. And you know what? That was the only major change. With that, a bunch of his rules changed. Because when he went to pick up food, he said, would I put this in a temple? Because he's really a wonderfully beautiful spiritual man. He even began to change the music he listened to. He used to listen to some music so loud that everybody around him was concerned it was hurting his eardrums. And he came back, and he's come back for several Date with Destinies as a support staff. And he said that, he doesn't even listen to the same music because he says, is that really doing my temple any good? He said, I want to take care of my temple. By the way, he's lost 90 pounds in the last 90 days simply by adopting that metaphor and adopting it fully. Living it every single day. It's become habitual to him. He said that once in a rare while, if he finds himself going down an old aisle that used to be familiar, he just pictures that body on a skewer above hell. And he said that's all it takes is a metaphor to knock him right out of it and get him out of those aisles he doesn't belong in. One of the most important distinctions that I made about global metaphors, having utilized them so much and worked with people on an ongoing basis, is that whether people know it or not, they've got global metaphors for themselves. They have metaphors for what they do for a living. And the challenge is if you don't consciously select your own metaphors, then what happens is your environment tends to create the metaphors for you. And sometimes those metaphors are disempowering, not empowering. I know for myself, for example, people used to ask me, well, what do you do? What are you exactly? You're not a psychologist and, what are you, a motivator? And I said, no, I'm not a motivator because I thought motivator, what a terrible metaphor. You pump somebody up and, a little bit later they drop right back down again. It's like taking a warm bath, and I've never considered myself just to be a motivator. Hopefully what I do helps people to motivate themselves by having them change some of their core beliefs and helping them develop strategies on how to produce consistent and specific results. But being a motivator is not what I want to be known as. So some people say, well, gosh, if you don't know what you are, I know what you are. You're a guru. And I got to see that in Life magazine and newspapers. And sometimes to this day, media will cover me as the guru of something. I don't want to be somebody's guru. I'm not any better than anybody else. And I'm not here to go out in the world and be everybody else's leader they're going to come pay homage to. That's not what I'm about. So I thought, well, I'm a teacher. I thought, oh, no, I'm more than just a teacher, humble as I am. There's got to be something more. And somebody said, you're a comedian. I thought, well, that's a nice compliment, but there's some serious stuff here. So I finally came up with, I'm a peak performance consultant. Well, that's accurate, but it's not very emotional. It didn't really create the emotion inside of me. We all need to find a metaphor for describing who we are, what we do. And one day I finally got it. I'm a coach. I thought, that's really what I am. What is a coach? To me, a coach is somebody who really cares. It's somebody who's warm and committed, and they're your friend. They also are the person that's going to challenge you. They're not going to let you off the hook just because they're your friend. They're the kind of person who knows. They've got knowledge and they've got experience. They've been there before. They have lots of distinctions. And the key is, yes, they do teach you new information, new strategies, and new skills and how to get results that are measurable. But a good coach affects your beliefs. And a good coach gets you to not only know what to do, they get you to do what you know. And that's when results really change in our lives. And I thought, that's what I am. And by the way, a coach isn't any better than the people they're coaching. In fact, some coaches coach people that are better than them. They just seem to have a few distinctions because that's been their area of focus. And you know what? As soon as I started using that metaphor for what I was, that I'm a success coach, I help to coach people on how to achieve what they really want more quickly and more easily. It changed the way I thought about myself. It made my work warmer. It made me enjoy everything I was doing. I said, yeah, that's who I am. I'm a coach. I've also found that having metaphors to describe what my seminars are really helped me out tremendously to be more effective and help me to translate to other people what they were really about. Now you say, well, that's just in the seminar business, right? Wrong. It's true of your business. It's true of your avocation. You've got to create a metaphor that creates a greater sense of richness and joy and fun and playfulness. Then you'll get more out of yourself. I'll give you an example that's measurable. I know several years back, P-I-E, the trucking service, they had some major challenges, and they found that 60% of all their shipping contracts were erroneous. It was costing them more than $250,000 a year. Well, they did an intensive study, and they found out that 56% of these errors were based on misidentification of containers. Well, they brought in a man named Dr. Deming, an American consultant who went over to Japan and whose philosophies on management and quality have been adopted wholeheartedly by the Japanese. In fact, they give away each year the Deming Award. It's the highest award a Japanese company can receive, and it is always broadcast on national television. In fact, over there, it said in the Wall Street Journal that Deming is considered to be up there right next to God, at least in the business circles. The bottom line is, based on their understanding of Deming's work, they decided to change the view that the workers had of themselves to get them to be more quality-oriented. And instead of seeing themselves as workers or truckers, they started telling people, you know what you guys are? You're craftsmen. At first, people looked at it kind of funny, but then they got hooked on the idea. They said, yeah, I'm a craftsman. And they kind of teased each other and smiled about it. But you know what? When you adopt a metaphor, along with it, you adopt a set of rules of how to think about yourself and how to behave and what to do. As a result, In less than 30 days, they cut their 60% erroneous shippings down to less than 10%, saving more than $250,000 a year. Metaphors pay. Metaphors make the difference in how you feel. Metaphors change the way other people see you. If you don't set the metaphors for who you are and what you're about, and you don't share them with other people, they're going to make up their own metaphors. And by the way, the more you understand about what other people's metaphors are for themselves, the more you'll be able to predict how they're going to behave. Again, if somebody sees themselves as a shark versus a teddy bear, there's a whole different set of behaviors that come with that, aren't there? I'll give you an example. Our interview this month is with Marva Collins. This woman is absolutely incredible. 30 years ago, she got involved in the public education system in Chicago, in the inner city. She looked around and saw second graders that had no desire to learn anything. They were bored, they were frustrated, people had given up on them, and she thought to herself, this is ridiculous. She said, the problem is not the kids, the problem is us. And she made some decisions that she was going to change it, that she had the power to do that. And she threw out all the textbooks that they were using that time that said things like see, spot, go, and she replaced them with Shakespeare. You're going to get a chance to hear just a few of her kids as well, because I interviewed them. These kids' lives are changed by this woman. I mean, they understand who they are and what they're capable of. She has helped to shape these children's destinies by helping them to adopt a set of beliefs and giving them some reference experiences that no one else could possibly dream of. Now, this woman is committed. When you listen to her on the tape, you'll get a sense of what her intensity is, and she has found ways to teach kids what things mean, what they're capable of, like few people I've ever met. So please take the time to listen to the interview. But I wanted to read you her description, because I asked her what her metaphors were for her life. Like, what is a teacher? And this is her description. She pulled out this piece of paper that she'd already written. She was very clear in her metaphors. And it says this: I am a teacher. I am as ancient as Jesus himself or Socrates. I am more than ancient. I am eternal. I mold my students for the future by making today different. My classroom is a workshop where all children find the opportunity to give might to their brains. Here they can plumb the ether and shackle the lightning. Few minor metaphors there. With those kinds of metaphors, with those kinds of beliefs, she's able to take kids who are dyslexic, who have learning disabilities, who have no desire to learn, and literally turn them around. Marva is a master of metaphor, and so she's a master at teaching. Kids learn through metaphor. So do big kids called adults. In fact, this month our book summary is One Up on Wall Street with Peter Lynch. Remember, Peter's the guy that if you would have invested $10,000 with him when it was at Fidelity Magellan Fund, that money within 10 years was worth $190,000. Now, in the internet age, that may not sound like very much, but most of the people that made money in the internet age lost all that money, and these companies continue to be profitable. So Lynch will show you, whether you're the average investor or whether you're the person who's already making a ton of money in the market, how what you're doing is really working and how you can take advantage of the greatest possible consistency in results. Anybody can make money once in a while and talk about a return they've gotten. But the truth is, over a 10-year period, 95% of investors lose money. Now, if you were part of that big bubble that happened on the internet, you know what I'm talking about. So be sure to review this month's One Up on Wall Street. By the way, what are some of the metaphors we use around people where we talk about books? Well, books to me are like treasures, because buried inside them are the resources that can give you anything you want for your life. And what's one we could apply to people? Don't judge a book by its cover. Speaking of empowering metaphors, one of the most simple and powerful metaphors that was offered me that really helped me get through some tough times where I looked like there was no way out. By the way, when you start thinking there's no way out, you must be using a metaphor that you're in a room or in a box or something like that. But one that really did help me a lot was simply the metaphor that God never closes a door without opening a window. There's always a way. Or God never closes a door without opening another one. That there's always a way around anything. That there's never an end. There's always a continuum. I'll never forget a time when my son Joshua came to me from school. And I think he was about 6 or 7 at the time. And a child at school, another child that he used to play with, one of his little friends, was climbing on some of the equipment and fell off and broke his neck and died. And I came home and Joshua was crying hysterically. And everything people tried to tell him and explain to him verbally about, why it had happened, what was going on, nothing had worked. So I sat down with him and I said, honey, I know how you feel. I said, but I think the challenge is that, while you miss him, when you have the right to miss him, and you should feel those feelings, you should also realize that the reason you feel this way is because you're a caterpillar. And he said, what? Kind of broke his pattern a little bit. I said, honey, you're just a caterpillar. And you're thinking like a caterpillar. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, what happens to caterpillars at some point? There's a point where most caterpillars think that they've died. They think it's over. They think life is ended. When's that? He said, oh, yeah. He says, well, when that thing starts wrapping around them. I said, yeah, that thing starts wrapping around them, and pretty soon the caterpillar gets buried by all this mass of stuff. And you know what? If you were to open up that thing it's buried under, the caterpillar's no longer there. It's just all this mush and goo and stuff. And most people, including the caterpillar, even the caterpillar that's transforming there, it's beginning to transform. It's not dying, it's transforming. You understand? It's going from one thing to something else. And I said, pretty soon, that caterpillar even thinks that life's over. But what happens is the caterpillar comes together, and what does it become? He says, a butterfly. I said, yeah, and can other people see that? Can the little caterpillars on the ground see that this caterpillar became a butterfly? He said, no, they don't see that. I said, that's right. And finally, he breaks out of the cocoon, and what does he do? He said, he flies. I said, yeah, and he doesn't fly right away. He gets out, and the sunlight comes down, and it dries off his wings, and then he goes out and flies, and he's even more beautiful than when he was a caterpillar. And I said, is he more free or less free? You tell me. He said, oh, he's much more free. I said, you think he has more fun? He said, yeah, he's got less legs to get tired. I said, that's right, he does. He doesn't need his legs anymore. He's got wings. And I said, honey, I think your friend's got wings now. And they said, it's not for us to decide when somebody becomes a butterfly. And we think it's wrong, but I said, I think God has a better idea when the right time is. I said, we may think summer should be here now. I mean, right now it's winter and you want it to be summer, right? But God's got a different plan. Sometimes we got to just trust that God knows how to make butterflies better than we do. And when we're caterpillars, sometimes we don't even realize butterflies even exist because they're up above us. But maybe we should just remember that. And he'd stop crying, obviously, and he'd smile, and he'd give me a big hug, and he said, yeah, I bet he's a beautiful butterfly. Metaphors can transform. Select them carefully. Select them intelligently. Select them in a way that deepens and enriches the experience of your life and the people you care about. Become a student of metaphors and become sensitized to them, and your whole life can change. Anytime you hear a metaphor that creates limits, just step in and offer a new one. Offer a new possibility. Break a pattern and give them a new choice, including yourself. So what's your assignment for this month? It's real simple. I want you to sit down and I want you to take out pen and paper with your journal. Now, you have a journal now, don't you? I'm not going to come chase you, but I may find you someday and see, do you have a journal or not? And you're going to tell me yes, right? Take out your journal and I want you to write down the following. Number one, what is life? And I want you to come and write down, number one, the metaphors you already linked to it. In other words, life is like what? It's as if life was what? And just brainstorm everything you think of it, because I bet you got more than one metaphor you link to life. When you're in a lousy state, you probably call it a battle or a war. When you're in a good state, maybe you think of it as a gift. But I want you to write them all down. And then I want you to decide, out of the list that you make, if life is this, then what does it mean to me? Like, if life is sacred, what does that mean? If life is a dream, what does that mean? If all the world's a stage, what does that mean? Each of your metaphors, by the way, will have benefits and they may have limitations. And all the world's a stage may be great because it may mean that, hey, you get a chance to go out there and make a difference and do something and you'll be heard. But also may make you be a person that's always performing. You don't want to be that. You want to be real. So take a look at the metaphors you have available. I want you to also make a list, number 2, of all the metaphors you link to relationship or marriage. Take a look at those metaphors. Are they empowering or disempowering? And then again, just being aware of your metaphors can change them. See, conscious awareness alone can transform things because your brain will start to say, that doesn't work. That's ridiculous. And you can adopt a new one so easily. That's the beauty of this technology. It is so darn simple. And thirdly, I want you to pick another area of your life that impacts you most, whether it be your business, whether it be your family or your children, whether it be your ability to learn. What are your metaphors for what learning is? So I want you to pick the third one for yourself, but write down the metaphors you currently use, brainstorm them out, look at their impact. Ask yourself, what are the consequences, positive consequences and negative consequences of this metaphor? And then after you've done that, see if you can't create some new ones you've never thought of before and decide, from now on, I'm going to think of life as these 4 or 5 things to start with at least. Life is not a war. Life is not a test. Life is a game. Life is a dance. Life is sacred. Life is a gift. Life is joy, whatever it is for you. And decide you're going to live those for the next 30 days. So if somebody asks you, how's it going? You might turn back to them and say, the gift is being enjoyed. I'll look at you and say, what? So nothing. Just my global metaphor for life. I'll say, what's that about? Say, listen to the tape. I will look forward to being with you again next month. Until then, enjoy your metaphors and live with passion. This month we have Dr. Warren Farrell as our guest. He's the author of The Liberated Man and his more recent book, Why Men Are the Way They Are. And Warren is considered to be one of the world experts in the relationships between men and women. For 20 years he's been studying that relationship, and I appreciate you taking the personal time to come and visit with us.
I'm really happy to do it.
That's great. Warren and I, by the way, have become friends, and I feel really appreciative to be able to call you a friend, and I feel very respectful that even though we're close friends, that every time I meet you, I learn something new from you, and I'm excited for our listeners to be able to learn some things from you as well here. But I want people to know that your book, Why Men Are the Way They Are, not only being a national bestseller, but it was incredibly provocative in that it really stirred people up. It was quite different than the perspective you've offered in Liberated Man. And one of the things that I respect about you is your continuous growth. As long as I've known you, you're always making new distinctions. You started out, I think, as a person who was basically presenting almost purely a woman's viewpoint of the man-woman relationship. With Why Men Are the Way They Are, it's kind of the man's perspective. And I think maybe part of your expertise has come because you've been at both ends and you really have an understanding of both those areas. I'm kind of gushy about you because you're my buddy, but I want people listening to know this is not just my view of you in terms of your expertise. After 20 years of working with men and women and writing this book, you've gotten incredible acclaim. On the cover of Warren's book, Why Men Are the Way They Are, quotes say things like, the most important book ever written about love, sex, and intimacy. That's the New York Post. My good buddy Ken Blanchard said, the best book I've read on male-female relationships, superb and brilliant. Dr. Carol Castle, author of Swept Away, says, witty, provocative, and probing. I guarantee this book will leave you with a different understanding of men and women. Simply terrific. And maybe one more example, the most important book ever written for women, the most important book ever written for men, Dr. John Mooney, professor of Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. You've stirred people up with this, and what we should start with is giving people a little bit of background on what were some of the personal reasons that made you want to study the relationship of men and women originally, and then let's talk a little bit about what some of your insights are. So what did start you?
I can remember my mother cycling in and out of depression, and I can remember her coming out of depression when she just took a simple clerical job, and she had other adults to communicate with, and she had some money so that she didn't have to go to my father like a welfare recipient asking my father for a dole so she could control her own life. And I can remember being touched by that and feeling like there's no reason in the world why a woman should have to be, in a sense, going to her husband and asking for permission when she's an adult human being.
Right.
And I started to see that she was, how much a state of mind feeling powerful is. Here my mother was going to work, a relatively simple job, and feeling more powerful than she was when she felt imprisoned with kids at home, and she only had 2 children. And so I was really feeling like there's something missing here. And when the women's movement surfaced, and women's movement was saying, in essence, women can control their own life. They don't have to be at home only. That's fine if they want to be, but it's not an obligation. It suddenly made sense to me. And in the meantime, unfortunately, my mother had gone into a deep state of depression and had died. And I think probably on a very personal and emotional level, I started to hear this perhaps in a way that was a little bit deeper than other people had a chance to hear. But more importantly than that, or as importantly as that, I was able to hear it and do something about it because my former wife was becoming vice president of IBM. She was controlling her life. She had her own source of income. And as a result of that, she said to me, if you need to take some more time out from your doctoral work and the women's movement is that inspiring to you, spend some time and do it. A lot of my male friends, my colleagues, were needing to support a family. They were not able to have the luxury of taking time out to change their doctoral dissertation topic, to reframe it, to turn it back into a committee 3 or 4 times like I had to do, take that extra half year to do that. I had the luxury to be able to sit back and look at the larger picture in life, and I had that luxury as a result of a woman supporting herself rather than me supporting the woman.
So as a result, you got involved in NOW at that time, right? NOW being the National Organization for Women.
Yes, I got involved with the National Organization for Women, and then I found myself listening to a lot of what they were saying. The women's movement was very impressed that I was listening rather than lecturing to them. They asked me if I would start some men's groups within the framework of the National Organization for Women. I did that. As the men's groups became successful and were producing men that were also listening, they asked me if I would run for the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City. And then I served on their board for 3 years and began articulating the women's perspective. And that's when I began to see that by articulating the women's perspective, I was getting a great deal of positive feedback from women.
Standing ovations.
Standing ovations constantly from women. But I also began to notice after a while that as I went back 4 or 5 years later to speak to the same groups again, that oftentimes I would notice that the women and men were broken up from each other.
The ones who'd listen to you.
The ones, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't presume to have had so much impact that I was the only cause in their breaking up.
I'm teasing.
Yes,
I'm
right.
teasing.
But nevertheless, I was saying to myself, I'm wondering here if I'm missing something. If maybe if I listened more carefully to the men would be showing up in larger numbers. I mean, I fooled myself into believing at the outset that the reason that there were 95% women in my audiences was because I was the only sensitive man in America. And, all the rest of the men were Neanderthals,
Right.
And, when I got over that self-serving attitude, I had one of those rare moments of internal security, where I finally allowed myself to say, well, maybe one of the reasons that men aren't showing up in such large numbers is because you aren't articulating something that rings true for men.
Right.
And so I started listening more carefully to my tapes of the men's groups I had started and began to see that, in fact, men were saying things that I was barely hearing. And as I began to hear those and articulate those things to women, I began to see that my standing ovations were dropping off from women.
At least at now.
Yes, at least at the outset.
Right.
But many women were coming up to me a few weeks later and saying, I took your perspective home and I tried it on my husband or I tried it on my boyfriend, and he was saying, oh, that's exactly the way I feel. Let me come to one of those meetings myself.
That's fabulous.
And so that was what started making me realize that if I was really going to help improve love between the sexes, I had to hear both sexes and get both sexes to understand what the other sex was not able to articulate for them.
I think the great value that I personally found in the book is it helped me to have a greater understanding of what men and women really need. For years, my own studies have been everything that we need comes down to our survival, and then we move up to higher levels of needs, of values, security, self-esteem, etc. But what you did is how people go about meeting those needs. How do you go about meeting the need of surviving, meeting the need of self-esteem, meeting the need of feeling like you're in control of your life is quite different based on cultural conditioning. And so it's not so much that we have different needs at the end, we have the same needs, but there may be different means to get those needs that we've learned culturally. So let's talk a little bit about that. What is the difference in your research between what a man needs and what a woman needs, and maybe also touch on what a man communicates he needs and what a woman communicates they need, because many times people don't say what they really need.
Yes. Both sexes have to learn how to survive. We taught women and men very different ways of getting those survival needs met. We basically taught women throughout history to do some version of finding a man to protect her and to protect the children that she would produce. We taught men, in order to get survival needs met, you learn how to produce them for yourself, but once you've learned how to produce them for yourself, you are going to be deprived of some things, namely love and sex, until you provide not only for your survival needs, but women's as well.
And your children's.
Yes. And so what basically men started learning was very good survival skills. What women started learning was very good skills in finding men, especially the men who were the best survivors. And the men who were the best survivors were also the best protectors and usually the best killers. And so women started learning, find a man who is the prince, find a man who is a hero. The very word hero comes from the Greek word meaning slave, protect, and servant. The hero was the servant of the society, the servant of the woman, the slave to the woman and the society, who was willing to risk his life to kill the dragon for her and the children and the community. She learned to find a survivor. He learned to find love and sexuality. The culture learned to deprive him of sexuality and love until he provided those survival needs for women and the children. Okay. The next stage happened. In the process, we started depriving both sexes of something. We know that he was deprived of love and sexuality until he provided for her survival needs.
So he had to become a performer. He had to be the best.
He had to be a performer. She was also deprived of something. She was deprived of learning how to provide for herself. all of this made no difference until the 1960s in middle-class societies, because basically women figured out a way of finding a provider, and when she did, she cashed that in at the height of her beauty power. And
what do you mean by that?
Then we basically told women, get as beautiful as you can by whatever standards were in the culture for beauty at that time. And then when you're most beautiful, usually around fertility age, 15 to 20 or so, you'd better find a man then when you're at the height of that beauty power and cash that in, meaning cash it in, marry him or some version of that, and get him to promise you security and protection for the rest of your life. Now that worked for most cultures for millions of years. The woman was spending her life basically as a slave to the children, and also provide nurturing needs and intimacy needs and sexuality needs for the man. And the man would provide security needs for the children and for the woman. And as long as that process occurred, both sexes were basically slaves. They were slaves to the next generation. Women were not men's slaves, and men were not women's slaves, but both sexes were slaves to the survival of the next generation. Okay. Then came the 1960s, and women looked at the situation, and they had been trained all their life to know that if they were beautiful, they could get their security, their survival locked in for a lifetime. But suddenly divorces threw them out in the workplace without such survival skills that men had. And they now had a 40-year-old body rather than a 20-year-old body, when the 20-year-old body was designed to get their security for life. And women were pretty upset and angry about that. But it was worse than that for women. Not only did they have a 40-year-old body when men were addicted for functional reasons to the 20-year-old body, but they were usually not just a woman. They were women oftentimes with 2 or 3 children. Wow. So they were now asking a man not just to marry a woman, but a package. And the man saw the law, and the law said if you marry her, you have to support those 2 or 3 children as well. And so the deal didn't look very good for him. If he was successful enough to support the 2 or 3 children, he was also successful enough to go after his addiction, the beautiful woman.
Why are men supposedly addicted to the beautiful one, quote unquote?
Men learned to be addicted to the beautiful woman because every society learned that they had to have some incentive for the man to be willing to risk his life to die for the woman and the children. And so they built up the image of the beautiful woman, because the beautiful woman in every society represented the genetic best. Not to manipulate the man, not for the women, but because the issue was the survival of the next generation. The beautiful woman was supposedly the genetic best, and the man who could kill, provide, and protect was the genetic best of the males. You put the 2 of them together, and you have the best genes with the best protectors for the next generation. However, in the 1960s, people said, hey, guess what? You know, the issue is no longer producing more children. And men and women were saying on a personal level, I don't want to just marry the best killer, the best survivor. I don't just want to marry a beautiful woman who is just focused on children. I want a woman who's intelligent, creative, confrontive, and loving, and kind and caring, and really loves me, and would love me even if I wasn't such a killer provider. It would love me if I was a warm, tender person who was earning maybe even less money than she was. So both sexes went into crisis. And when they went into crisis, they got divorces. But here was the trick of the divorce. We gave women divorces, but women were divorced without learning how to create survival skills.
In terms of earning security
and
income.
Yes, here's what the big missing link. Men and women got to the place where they were able to ask what I call stage 2 questions, questions of love and values and spiritual connection. We got to stage 2 once we learned to survive. But it was really only men that we taught how to develop survival skills. So we got women to ask stage 2 questions and have stage 2 values, but as soon as they finished asking them, they often said, I want a divorce from my husband, but then we threw them out into the workplace without the survival skills that gave them the ability to ask those questions to begin with.
So in other words, let's see if I'm understanding you.
That's the key link here. Yeah. Right,
so let's see if I'm understanding you. So what you're saying basically is that all of a sudden we're in a situation in society where survival is not the issue. And all of a sudden, women are looking over and they're seeing this man behind a newspaper or is watching television. She's saying, he's not intimate, he's not loving me, he's not giving me my deeper needs. Survival's not the question anymore. Men maybe are doing the same thing, looking across saying, gosh, I'm working so hard, she doesn't understand who I am, I don't have the love, the intimacy I want. So they both say, I want something more. And all of a sudden they choose a new vehicle called divorce.
Yes, but she was able to ask those questions because her survival needs were taken care of. But after divorce, oftentimes her survival needs were not taken care of.
Meaning economically.
Economic needs, right. So she's often back in stage 1 worrying about survival.
I see.
But we've taught her to ask stage 2 questions without adequately teaching her how to provide for stage 1 needs, survival needs.
So a woman now is in the marketplace, she's 40 years old, let's say, by using your example, and she's in a place where she hasn't been trained to be in that marketplace of jobs. She doesn't know how to compete. The man has been trained his whole life. You're to compete, you're to be the best, here's how you beat other men, here's how you're supposed to be number one, and it's an unfair situation. And that's where you're saying the women's movement basically started.
Yes, the women's movement started there and said, hey, the workplace is not providing enough for the women. But the fallacy was that they started blaming men for not paying women equally, when in fact women hadn't paid equal dues into the workplace. Women
they had in life.
They absolutely had in life, but they hadn't done it in the workplace. What we all needed to do was to make a transition, because men were not making more in the workplace because men had more power. Men were making more in the workplace because they learned they wouldn't get love until they earned more than the women earned in the workplace.
I see.
The degree to which men earned more in the workplace was an indicator of what the men needed to do to compensate for their powerlessness, to compensate for, in other words, a man couldn't get a woman's love by earning the same as a woman earned in the workplace.
Well, give me an example of what you mean by that.
Okay, a man who was a secretary and who was earning enough to support himself learned, if I'm a secretary or I'm a receptionist, I'm not going to get a woman's love. A woman's not going to take me home on Thanksgiving and Christmas and say to her mom and dad, I'm so happy I'm marrying a man who can support himself. He's a secretary. I want to marry him.
Parents are going to pull this daughter aside and say, let's talk.
And they're going to say, honey, a few realities here. And if the parents don't do it, her women friends will do it. And so women get a very clean, clear message that don't marry a man who's earning less than you do unless it's temporary. He's going to law school or medical school, or he's preparing to earn more. He has potential. Marry a man who has potential. Those words are often not said directly, but the man picks up the message that if he's a doctor, he's a lawyer, he picks up the message that success is the best preventive medicine to avoid the cancer of being rejected by a woman.
So a man learns basically to get love through the process of performing and being the best and being the strongest.
He's been deprived of love and understanding until he is a good provider. When he's a good provider, we'll give him love and understanding and sexuality.
And if he's the best provider, the better the provider he is.
The better the provider he is, he runs into a catch-22. The more of a provider he is, the more he can get a woman of his choice to provide love and understanding. But the problem is, the better the provider that he is, the more likely he is to be away from home doing the providing and not around to benefit from the love and the understanding that he married a woman for it in order to get.
You gave a classic example I remember reading in your book about the lawyer. Maybe you could relate that example here.
Yes, in fact, early in my work in this area, I worked with a man in a group named Ralph, who was a lawyer, and everyone in the group felt that Ralph had the most power of anyone in the group. But as we got to know Ralph very well, we began to realize that Ralph really didn't even like himself. He couldn't listen effectively to his wife because what he had learned as a lawyer was to argue a lot more than to listen. And he didn't like the fact that he was oftentimes supporting clients he didn't believe in. He didn't feel he had integrity with himself. Ralph in particular loved coaching baseball, but he learned very early in his life he was never going to be a baseball player and make $1 million doing that. So he learned to give up his love. He learned to give up the things he enjoyed doing with kids as maybe an elementary school teacher coaching baseball, and to go into something that earned income. So from his perspective,
he did this to be able to earn love.
He figured out at an early age what he knew he needed to do in order to earn love. And one of the dilemmas that we're in as a world society at this point is that many men feel that they spent their life trying to earn the power and success that would bring them love, and they're being told that they're only interested in power, when in fact what they're interested in is love, and they knew that there would be no love until they got a reasonable amount of success and power.
Interesting. Well, what happened in this case with Ralph?
When I worked with Ralph and his wife, what became real apparent were that three things were at stake. One was his attitudes toward work had to change. And he said to me, as long as my wife wants this better home, as long as she is, every time we pass a beautiful home on the ocean and a second home, and our friends have a second home on the island, on Long Island, and I keep hearing that message, I'm going to feel that I have to keep producing at a very high level.
In order to be loved.
In order to be loved, in order to be okay with the family. And we all knew that that only was true, not only of the wife's message to him, but it was also being fed on by the respect that he'd get at work for being a partner and so on. So he was getting it from both angles. And so he and his wife had to be clear that it was okay for them not to have that second home in Long Island, and it was okay for them not to have the best home in the neighborhood, but that it was more important for them to have love between the two of them than to have a home with him not in the home.
Yeah, I hear you.
And when Ralph knew that that message was coming through on every level from Mary, he knew that he then had basically himself to work on.
That's great. Okay? That's great.
And of course he had a lot of work to do with himself. His own self-image was not just tapped into Mary's expectations of him, but was, I'll be respected more by my partners at work if I perform more. I'll be respected more by my dad if I perform more. My mom will say, my son, the lawyer who has a home out in, and you know, and she'll say that with a pride in her voice that I want my mom to have in her voice.
Right.
So Ralph had to work out that stuff, and Mary had to work out her mixed messages, and Ralph also had to work out the message that said, I'm going to be a better father if I send my daughters to Barnard or Columbia or some private school. Maybe I'll be a better father if I spend more time caring for around my children, and if they go to a state school that maybe costs a little bit less money, that's going to be a trade-off that's going to be okay for me to make. And when both Mary and Ralph learned the whole concept of trade-offs, rather than both thinking they had to perform to do it all, that was when we made the real breakthroughs with both of them.
I see. Because so many people in life go out and they achieve quote-unquote success, let's say men, and they get to the top, quote-unquote, and then they say, is this all there is?
Yes, and this is the midlife crisis for many men. They say, is this all there is, this selling product X for company Y, and losing my wife in the process, and for all practical purposes being a wallet to my children, who I notice come around me a great deal when they want more money for the next tuition payments and pay attention to me for a few minutes to entertain me then, but really I don't really feel that they want to know me and what my needs and feelings are, and maybe I'm also not around them enough to know them. And so the combination makes many men feel more like a wallet than a human being. And as men begin to learn that, they say, maybe what the midlife crisis is about is not a process of immaturity, but a process of tremendous potential for maturity. Maybe it's about my reevaluating my values and having the guts to say to my children, I don't want to be a wallet, and the guts to say to my wife, I don't want to be a wallet, but I want to take a career that's more meaningful to me, that's more integrity-based, and if I produce less income doing it, that's what being a man is about. Having the guts enough to say, I want your love, by an integrity-based career that allows me to do what I want to be doing during the day at work, rather than producing money for somebody else to have an integrity-based life.
What can a woman learn from this if she believes that this is really what a man's feelings are?
When she says that this is what she believes to a man, the first thing that's going to happen for the man is he's going to start watching to see whether her behavior matches what she says. He's going to be as suspicious as a woman will be when a man says, I don't care about beautiful women at all. The woman who hears that is going to start watching what he's watching at the next party. And if he says, oh, beauty doesn't make any difference to me, but she notices him flirting with a beautiful woman, she's not going to believe a word he's saying. The same thing happens for a man who hears a woman say, I want you to run your life based on integrity and love and having more time with me. He's going to notice, is she admiring something that's more expensive? Is she flirting at a party more with a guy who's very successful and less with a guy who is a very caring, loving, listening man, but is not successful? He'll watch her behavior just like she watches his behavior for the cues as to what will bring him her love.
What I'm hearing you say, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that men and women have been conditioned throughout their lives for two different things. They both need the same things. They both need security. Mm-hmm. Men have been conditioned, boy, you better perform, you better be the best so you can eventually not only survive, but you can have love. If you do that, you're going to attract a woman. And you're going to attract her because she needs what you can provide in terms of security. A woman's been taught, boy, you better be attractive if you want to attract that man into your life and get him to commit to making you secure. Mm. You're saying the challenges then come basically when people go beyond security and beyond love, and the challenges happen for men when they say, gosh, I've worked all this time to make things happen. I'm making it happen, but I'm not getting love because I'm not there to be there.
Yep. And also the skills that I've learned to be successful at work are oftentimes exactly the skills that have made me unsuccessful in intimacy.
Like what, for example?
For example, a man in any profession learns that if he listens for a couple of seconds, picks up the gist of what someone else is saying, and begins to form in his own mind's eye a flaw that the other person has or a contribution that he can make, he can get a boss's attention and often get a promotion. But he takes that same skill of what I call self-listening home, and his wife presents a problem that she has. He listens for a couple of seconds, picks up the gist of what she's saying, and he finds himself forming in his own mind's eye a contribution or a flaw. And he tells her, well, honey, what you should have done differently is, or what you did wrong was. She doesn't feel heard or loved. She feels lectured to and condescended to. And so she doesn't feel like she wants to bring problems to him anymore. She finds herself bringing problems to her woman friend. And this creates a double dilemma for both sexes. One of the things that we did very differently in the training of the sexes is we told women, get your security by marrying men and take care of your intimacy needs, oftentimes by connections with your children and by connections with women friends and connections with your parents. So women got a lot of their intimacy needs met by people other than men. Men could not get their intimacy needs met by their colleagues at work, because the more successful they were at work, the shorter the window of listening to a man who was a colleague's vulnerabilities at work. If you and I are competing to be vice president of a company, and I come in and I say to you, Tony, I'm having a lot of problems with my relationships with my wife, well, you might listen to me for 5 minutes. But at the end of 5 minutes, if I do this a second and third day in a row, the door is going to be closed to me. Whereas a woman goes to her woman friends and she says, I'm having problems with Tony, or I'm having problems with Warren, and that woman friend's incentive will be to support her, and they'll feel bonded by that common dilemma that they're both having, and they'll talk to each other more often, not less often. So women and men both have enormous intimacy needs, but here is the trick. Women learn to take care of their intimacy needs in a lot of different places. Children, women friends, parents, and men. Men put all their eggs of intimacy in the basket of women, which is why when men feel that they've found a woman that they can really open up to and love, they'll marry anywhere on the socioeconomic spectrum to get that love. Women's deprivation is different. Their deprivation is economic security, which is why even if they meet a loving, tender, open, caring man, they don't feel so deprived of intimacy. They feel deprived of the possibility that once they have children, they won't be able to take care of the children and themselves and have intimacy with the children if they also have to take care of economic security needs.
Like getting a job.
Like getting a job full-time, and particularly a job that will be big enough if it's a job to support themselves, the children. And so they end up falling in love within the framework of men who are more successful. And then they say, gee, what I miss from these men is intimacy.
So they fall in love. What you're saying is they're attracted to a man who can provide the security for their family or their future family. And yet, in order for him to be successful, he's not there, and then their intimacy is not being made.
Yes. So when a man and a woman meet each other today, what they find is they have two different sets of expectations. The successful woman meets a successful man, and she says to herself, I'm thinking about children in the future, and when I think about children in marriage, I have three basic options. Option one is I'll take care of those children full time. Option two is I'll be a full-time career woman while we have somebody support the children and be there for the children. Option three is I'll do some combination of both. I'll maybe take off from work for 6 months or longer, full-time, take care of the children full-time, go back part-time, then go back full-time, and then maybe for a second child repeat the cycle. She says, I have three options: work full-time, children full-time, juggle the combination of both. He looks at the world and a successful wife and says, if we have children, I have three different options. Option one, work full-time. Option two, work full-time. And option three, maybe work 2 jobs. Or intensify his commitment to the work that he's doing to provide for the difference between the income she used to make and the income she makes now. So she says, I want commitment. He's afraid of commitment because he's afraid of intimacy. But he, unable to articulate what he's afraid of, is really not afraid of commitment because he's afraid of intimacy. He's afraid of commitment because he knows that if there's children down the line, that committing will mean not an increased commitment to the children and to intimacy, but an increased commitment to the economics of the relationship so that she can have intimacy with the children. He learns that commitment means commitment to economics, not commitment to intimacy. He learns that commitment means commitment to be away from intimacy.
Because he's going to have to work harder.
Because he's going to have to work harder to provide for the children, the children's college education, and for her ability to have time with the children. Men and women, when they have children, women are still 43 times more likely to take off from the workplace to be with the children for 6 months or longer when the children are very young.
So you see this as a major source of stress in virtually any man-woman relationship that's going to mature. Is that
It's
true?
a major source of stress in every perception of needs and wants that males and females have. As long as both sexes are very clear at the outset that both sexes want to be career people and have no children, oftentimes this problem doesn't come up. But as long as a man believes that marriage might lead to children, and the unstated hidden agenda is that the woman will have those three options and he will have the one option, the moment that is in the cards, in the future, the man starts thinking that my career is more important than hers. Why? Because they are planning on a career in which his career will be more important than hers. And so he's planning for a reality base that's accurate. It's not his paranoia.
What about the challenges that come up between men and women where women say, well, how come men are so preoccupied with sex? This man is so, he's attracted to other women or he's attracted to younger women. Why isn't he attracted to me? Where does that come up? And what has your research found about that? Is it really true? Is it a generalization that women have? Is it a generalization men have? Where does the conditioning come in?
The reason that many women feel that men are attracted to beautiful women who are younger is not because women are crazy, but because it's true. And one of the reasons it's true is because for millions of years it was functional for societies to train men to be in love with a beautiful young woman. Because when he fell in love with the beautiful young woman, and the more he would do for the beautiful young woman would be the more he would provide for her, the better he would provide for the children and for her. The more he'd be willing to die for her and protect her and the children. Women selected for men who were addicted enough to their youth and beauty to be willing to die for that youth and beauty. Hence, we learned stories throughout mythology that thousands of men would compete to kill the dragon. All the men would die except for one. The one man who lived would get the beautiful princess. The basic metaphor there was find some way of killing off the things that will hurt society, that will damage the potential for the community and for me, the woman, to die. The one man that survives, I will choose him. And we got men addicted to that beautiful woman in order to have the incentive to do that. Now that addiction to the beautiful woman is with us, we are all reinforcing it every day. Go to any school system and we will find dozens of beautiful cheerleaders cheering for men to play smash face with each other.
Smash face. Why are they willing to do that?
They're willing to do that because they learn that if they smash each other's faces and carry this piece of pigskin across, 100 yards and do it more successfully than the other men do, they'll have the love not only of the beautiful woman, but they'll have the respect of their father. And that's only a metaphor for the doctor and the lawyer. And then when they become the doctor and lawyer, what are they going to hear the mother say? My son, the doctor, with pride. They're not going to hear their mother say, my son, the intimate one, with pride.
I understand. Now, what are some of the lessons that kids are learning? Let's go back to that. Let's say in junior high about the differences between themselves, between a young boy and a young girl.
Yeah, here's how powerful the lesson is, and here's how unchanged that lesson is for the woman or man who's listening who's an adult and for your kids. I'll ask you to think about this as an adult, and I'll also ask you to hear that as you're thinking about this, that the same thing is true for the junior high school male and female today. If you're a woman, think of the man that you would have most loved to have asked you out to the prom, who was so out of reach for you that you could never even get his attention, much less get him to ask you out to the prom. Now, you may have been able to get the attention of every guy in your school. If you could, go to a school beyond. Go to some, maybe you couldn't get Robert Redford's attention. Go to some guy who you couldn't get to ask you to the prom. Now, think of who that guy was for a moment. I'll come back to you in a second. Guys, think of the woman that you would have loved to have asked out to the prom, but you feared that if you asked her out, she either would have said no or she would have said yes and grimaced. If you're thinking of the right woman, to this day you should know her name. And women, if you're thinking of the right man, to this day you should know his name. And if you're thinking of the right woman or man, to this day they probably don't even know your name. Okay? So now let's go back to the woman and the man. Women, think about whether the man that you were thinking of was good looking. The chances are about 95% that he was good looking. Think about whether he was some sort of performer or another. Was he a jock? Was he a leader of the student rebels? Was he successful on campus? Was he older and sort of, you knew he had potential? Did he have no direct success, but you knew this guy in a few years had career potential? The chances are he fit at least one of those categories.
Or he was a leader in some
way.
Maybe an anti-hero.
Yes, an anti-hero, leader of the rebels. He had the biggest car. He was driving around, like he in some way performed, stood out, had the indicator of being some type of master of his environment performer. Okay? Men, think of the woman you were most wanted to ask to the prom. The chances are fairly good that she was beautiful, very attractive. But when I asked you the question, think about whether she was a jock, best football player, the chances are, you'll laugh. If I ask you whether she was a student body president, the chances are about 10% that you'll say yes. If I ask you whether you knew that she had career potential, the chances are you'll draw a blank, and you'll say, I just don't know either way whether she had career potential or not. Now, the invisible curriculum that we got and that our kids are still getting is this. The woman learns that if she's beautiful, that she can be a man's first choice. The man learns that if he's only handsome or beautiful, that's a prerequisite to being her first choice, but it isn't enough for being her first choice. The young boy learns that for him to be good looking as she, is not enough to be the woman's first choice. In addition to being good looking, he has to compensate for his powerlessness by being both good looking and also some form of future potential performer or success. He also learns something very different. That if he's going to ask her to the prom, he better damn well not go up to her and say, I'd like to ask you to the prom, Dutch treat. Or she's maybe going to feel hurt and insulted. That he'll be in a better position to ask her to the prom and pay for it and say that he'll pick her up in a limousine. That the more he has to offer, the more his chance of success in asking her to the prom is. So he still learns that he'll have a better chance of asking out the most attractive women in school if he learns to pay for their attention and company. He learns he's not as powerful as the most attractive woman, his first choice, until he compensates for his powerlessness by also offering money in addition to performing. He also learns that he'd like to be sexual with her, if he's asking her to the prom probably, and that he's not going to get to be sexual with her until he risks the rejection to compensate for his powerlessness. From his perspective, he would feel far more powerful if she asked him, and if she risked rejection by kissing him first. And so he would feel far more powerful if she risked the rejection and she asked him out.
But that's not going to happen.
He knows it's not going to happen, so he knows that he has to compensate for his experience. His view of the world is that he's not as powerful as the woman who's his first choice, even if he's just as good looking as that first choice woman, until he compensates for his powerlessness by performing, by paying, and by pursuing. He has to ask her, take initiatives, risk the rejection, and with AIDS, he has to risk the rejection for a longer period of time.
Yeah, I guess so.
And so, it's only created for him one more performance barrier to overcome. Now, this creates a lot of the misunderstandings between the sexes. Women say to me, Warren, pursuing, let's just take that for a moment. Why can't a man just let a friendship develop? And if sex happens, it happens. Well, I find that when I do the role reversal workshops that I do with you in Hawaii, Tony, that one of the things that happens is that when women really get into taking the sexual initiatives with men, and they know that nothing will happen unless they take the initiatives, like men often know, that they are saying to me, I just wanted the sex to happen sooner, because she intuitively knew that the longer the period of friendship, the longer the period of potential rejection.
So in other words, what you're saying is that a man is trying to initiate the sex to know that he's being accepted or being loved, that he can be intimate. And the longer he waits, the longer he's putting off what may be inevitable pain. That is, that he's not accepted at the deepest level.
Yes, and what the man learns is that there's about 150 risks of potential rejection between eye contact and sexual intercourse. That creates a lot of anxiety. So he starts compensating to avoid that anxiety. He starts telling stories about himself that makes himself look good, so the woman will think she has a real catch, and the woman sees right through it and says, give me a break. And, and in the meantime, what's building up between the two of them is alienation, misunderstanding. But what comes out of the role reversal process is an understanding that whatever sex we ask to take the sexual initiatives is the sex that wants that process of misunderstanding and anxiety to end the fastest, because they're the ones risking the bulk of the rejection. And so one of the reasons I do workshops in which I ask women to play men's roles and men to play women's roles is that I find that if I explain this to a woman or a man, they can understand that intellectually, and it reframes what they understand about the other sex. But it's not until the woman emotionally goes through asking a first choice man out and trying to get him to be sexual with her, and him resisting, like I was just talking about, that she finally understands, my goodness, I'm wanting to make this period of time as short as possible. Now I understand why men are so minimally interested in a period of friendship preceding sex.
Interesting. So we've talked a lot about what some of the problems are. What are some of the solutions? We said the problems are there's a tremendous difference in what men have been conditioned to do to receive love and what women have been conditioned to do to receive love. Our society is changing radically. What's the solution to making these relationships work more rapidly and more effectively and at a deeper level?
One of the solutions is things like working out trade-offs, working out the types of compromises, and maybe saying, here's my value for intimacy, here's my value for time with you, here's my value for success, and to the degree that they're blocking each other, maybe I need to give up a little bit more of one to get more time with the other. But the biggest solution, by I'd say a factor of 5, is merely understanding what the other sex goes through. I have almost never had a couple come up to me and say, Warren, we'd like a divorce. My partner understands me.
So what does a man want a woman to understand? Give me the synopsis of it.
First of all, let me just say, for men, the understanding is particularly important because men have all their eggs of intimacy and understanding wrapped up in the basket of the woman. And so the man, more than anything else, wants understood that if you want me to play this role, I'll play this role, but please understand me. I'm doing this not because I have more power, not because I want it over you, not because I want to dominate, because I think this is the way I can get your love and to serve you. And if you're telling me that this is what you require, just at least when I come home late at night, don't say to me, why are you coming home late? Say to me, thank you for staying later, to work late, to provide more for me and the family. And if I hear that from you, I'm going to feel like coming home sooner. And the portions of me that stay at work later because I feel I'm going to get misunderstanding when I come home is going to be dumped. And I'm going to be coming home as soon as possible to get the understanding that I'm feeling from you when I come home.
Also, if you're getting reinforcement at home saying you're going to have more love being there, then you're not going to be looking for that love through your work or the respect of your peers quite as much.
Precisely. Here's another major difference between men and women that creates a lot of misunderstandings. Many women say, okay, I'm out working and you're out working, and therefore I want you to share half the housework and half the child care. The man says, that sounds fair, but there's something in me that doesn't feel understood by that comment. What is it? And when he searches, he finds that what it is that he may be producing more income because all his life he's sacrificed the type of career he wanted. He didn't stay as an elementary school teacher. He became an elementary school principal because he knew that he wasn't going to be earning enough income as an elementary school teacher. He sees becoming an administrator as a sacrifice. He wants it appreciated as a sacrifice. If as a result of that he's producing 70% of the income, he wants a wife that says, okay, I know you're producing 70% of the income. I'll do 70% of the work around the house. You do the 30%. And if we want to renegotiate, and I'll produce half the income not by option but by obligation, and I'll stick to it for a number of years. If you do half the child care and the housework for a number of years, that's fine.
But he doesn't want that anyway. What he wants is her to say, I love you, and I'm intimate with you, and I worship you because you're the principal, in essence. Isn't that true, though?
No, he wants to know that he's doing everything he can to do what he feels will make him most loved by her. He wants to know that he's working as hard as he can to do the best he can to provide for himself, for her, for the kids, and to have as much time with the kids as possible. Every man wants time with his kids. Every man wants time with his wife, if he's at all still in love with her. And when he hears from his wife that you are not coming home because you don't want time with me, it only drives him further from home, because he knows that he wants that love from her.
And also, he's working to get it, and now he's not getting it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like a double negative.
Yes.
What does a woman want?
As we said before, she first wants those survival needs taken care of, but once the survival needs are taken care of, she usually, if we ask her what she wants, she says, I want intimacy, I want communication, I want understanding, I want a sense of humor, I want a sense of fun, I want a sense of adventure. She wants all those things. Oftentimes she finds those things most missing from the men in her life because, as I was mentioning before, she marries within the framework of the more successful men, and then those men, in the process of becoming the successful men that she married, oftentimes are most missing those qualities and most off doing other things other than intimacy-based things.
So it's a catch-22.
Both sexes have their catch-22. Women's catch-22 is marrying within the framework of the more successful men and then missing the very intimacy that she wants.
Because he's not there.
Because he's not there.
Or he's burnt out by the time he gets to her.
Men's catch-22 is feeling that they have to be successful in order to get love, and then continuing to be successful in order to get love, but being so far away from both love physically because he's working too many hours, and also developing personality characteristics that are inversely related to love. What both sexes need more than any other thing is to understand that the other one just needs appreciation and understanding for the burden on their back. The difference in the last 20 years is that we've done a very good job of articulating women's burden. Men have done a terrible job at articulating their burden, and men cannot expect women to hear what men do not say. And men have to have the courage and the guts to articulate what they feel and think, and have the respect enough for women to articulate that, and know that maybe some women will withdraw from them, but it takes guts to say what men really think, and risk the possibility that some women will withdraw from them, but other women will understand, and the women who understand are the ones they need to select for, and they need to provide enough of their own intimacy needs so that they don't feel that they're a house of cards the moment a woman says, I'm not going to understand you.
So we live in a society, though, still where this conditioning is continuing, and there's not a lot out there teaching people about how to make the relationship really work.
Yes.
What do you see as the solution as a society?
We're opening up more options for women, but we're not opening up, as of this point, more options for men. So we're saying things to women like, yes, you can have a combat role or join the armed forces. We're not saying to women and men, equality means sharing the obligation to do a combat role. We're saying to women, you can have the option of aborting a child or putting a child up for adoption or having the child yourself. We're not saying to men, you have an equal say in the decision-making process of whether that child becomes aborted, gets put up for adoption, or is born. And so we're saying, men, we want you to take the responsibility, put out the money, but not have the rights. And so what we are dealing with in the next 20 or 30 years is dealing with a new concept of equality, where both sexes articulate what they want as rights and understand that for every new right comes a new responsibility. You can't have the right to be involved with children on an intimacy level if you don't take on the responsibility of discipline, of nurturing. But you can't expect a man to take on that responsibility unless he has the right to have some say and some leverage vis-a-vis the woman in his life.
And the time to do that.
And the time to do that, exactly. And so what we'll be seeing in the next 40 or 50 years is, first, men saying, what are the feelings that I haven't been in touch with? Second, gathering the guts to express those feelings. Third, when they express those feelings, risking the possible rejection they'll get when they express them. Fourth, we'll be seeing some political things happening where men will be saying, I want equality to not have to do all the hazardous jobs in order to earn a living. I want you to share those hazardous jobs with me. I want you to earn by obligation as much as I do, so I have the opportunity to be as much involved with the children as you do, not earn by option as much as I do. And so we'll have a negotiation between men and women. The long-term result of that negotiation will be men and women first understanding each other, and secondly, loving each other a lot more, because men will be around more to love, they'll be more involved with the kids to love, they'll be more involved with women. We'll also have women that will be truly their own person, not women who define earning enough to support themselves as equality, but who know that equality is sharing with her husband the responsibility for supporting the children 20, 30 years down the line. That's what equality is financially. And what equality is for him is to be sharing the housework and child care, not just helping with the housework and child care after she takes all the responsibility for figuring out what needs to be done when and assigns it out to him.
So it sounds like your vision is the throwing from one end of the pendulum to the other and then finally coming in the middle where we understand each other and where we work very hard to find a way practically to support each other's needs.
Yes, I will be supporting men to the degree of articulating their feelings and their needs and having the guts to articulate that to women. I will not be supporting men in blaming women and creating a reverse, instead of male bashing, female bashing. Yes. And I think that what we need to do is the next level needs to be for men to recognize that women have responded to men with anger out of a misinterpretation of what men were trying to do, and that it is not necessary to respond to women with anger out of a second misinterpretation. We need to move to a level now where we take responsibility for articulating our feelings. We need to give rewards of our love to the women who can hear it.
So what it sounds like is what your goal in your life really is to change people's perception of what men really need and also what women really need, and to help people have a clear understanding of the reality rather than distorted conditioning that we've had in society.
Change their perceptions of what they need, and also change the whole concept of what power is. The perception of what power is, that power is not accumulating a series of economic rewards. Power is having control over your own life. And the man who is earning money for somebody else does not have control over his life. The man who is striking a balance between intimacy and earnings and has his wife striking the same type of balance is much more likely to have control over his own life, and that to me is power.
Fabulous. Well, I think we'll end with that, Warren. That's what this is all about, Power Talk, and I think you've offered again a great deal of insight as to what makes men and women do what they do. I would encourage those listening to pick up the book, because we've attempted to condense 20 years of research and articulate it in a short period of time. But I think the way you lay it out in your book allows people to take it in. Plus, you show the cultural conditioning and where it comes from, the advertising step by step. And I think it provides a great deal of input as to how we can better raise our kids so they have greater choices than those of us who have been conditioned for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. So again, thank you for your time. I look forward to your next book.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure doing this with you.
Thanks a lot.